pleased to introduce Larry Everest, who is here to talk about Yemen, Iran, and the whole Middle East and what's going on. So, welcome, Larry.
You know, I want to make a few points. The first thing I want to say is I think we have to try to get our minds around how horrific and ghoulish and barbaric U.S. and Saudi Arabia's actions are in Yemen that are happening right now, and how people are being trained in this country to not give a shit and to just ignore it and to only care about what's happening to Americans. I mean, I was watching the nightly news tonight. The first story is of some tornado someplace in the U.S. There was another story about people suffering here from hay fever. And then there was one about Tom Brokaw and his tragic but heroic fight against cancer, you know, and other such things. There wasn't a word about Yemen. In Yemen, the country, the people can see the map well enough, I think. Okay, leave it like that. In the country of Yemen, Yemen is a poor country to begin with. Yemen is a country right now, even before this bombing started in late March, is a country in which 2 out of every 3 children is suffering from malnutrition. In other words, their growth is being stunted by malnutrition. I don't know if you can put on one of that picture, Jacques. You know, this is the kind of picture that we should be seeing. 2 of her, these are her children. She's trying to feed her children. 2 of her children aren't here because they've already died of starvation. That's the situation in Yemen even before the war. And so what has Saudi Arabia been doing? They've been bombing people in Yemen. And not only have they been bombing people in Yemen in order to control the country, they've been bombing airfields so people cannot fly in humanitarian relief. They've bombed places. There are 300,000 people that have been driven out of their, away from their homes, displaced because of the bombing. 300,000. And they've even bombed refugee camps. And they're not only doing that, they are blockading food shipments to this country. Can you imagine that if this was some enemy of the United States doing this, Russia or somebody else? They'd be screaming war crimes and crimes against humanity. You know what happens if you block fuel shipments in a country like Yemen? You can't operate water pumps. People don't have any water. You can't operate generators, so hospitals go dark, even, you know, at a time when thousands of people are being wounded or killed. You know, people can't even drive cars to get the food that is there. It can't be transported around. I mean, and this is, you know, this is just, this is deliberate targeting of food in a country that's already starving. And what's the United States doing? It's, you know, oh, poo-poo. That's as Kerry was saying today, oh, gee, this is a humanitarian crisis. We hope there's a humanitarian pause. What the fuck does that mean, really? What, so for 24 hours people get a few crumbs? And this is after the United States has given support to Saudi Arabia. It sent its whole fleet into the, you can put the map back up there, Jacques. why don't you actually show the one of some of the refugees and some of the people that have been killed in this. This is a family fleeing by boat. Thousands of people are trying to get out of Yemen. Look at, these are children. Can you imagine if any of you have children or grandchildren who are young, 3, 4, 5-year-olds? Can you imagine the impact of all of a sudden you've got to pick up and just get on a boat with whatever you can carry and go to some other country? And everyone around you is terrified? What does that do to somebody? And then, you know, as I mentioned, over 1,500 people, and if you could change the slide, over 1,500 people have been killed in Yemen because of this bombing, this relentless bombing by the Saudis. And this is just one example. You can see this is in a city, in a residential area, and it's just being reduced to rubble. I read today there was a report that a whole family of, you know, an apartment building killed 27 people just today in one of these bombings. So what's the U.S. doing? It's sort of, you know, crocodile tears about humanitarian relief, but meanwhile, it sent its fleet to back the Saudis up into the Arabian Sea. It promised speeded up arms deliveries. It's preparing a summit to reassure all these reactionary monarchies in Saudi Arabia, you know, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, that the U.S. is going to support them even as they're negotiating with Iran. And it's speeded up arms delivery. So it's backing this whole thing up, and it's just ghoulish and outrageous. And just stop and think for a minute about the fact that, you know, 99.9% of people in this country have no idea this is going on. Even the few pictures we're showing here, people haven't seen this. They don't have any clear idea that the U.S. is backing the starvation of a starving people. You know, and so what Americans are being systematically trained in is only American lives matter. That was the point of that. Oh, hay fever. Oh, somebody's got cancer. Tornadoes. Oh, what's happening to America? You know, while America is literally murdering people all over the world. And, you know, one of the things that Ardea Skybreak points out in the new interview is, you know, a lot of middle-class people, and I've had people say this. I was talking to one progressive middle-class person about, no, we're for an actual revolution, and the person said, well, you mean you want blood to run in the streets here? And I said, blood's already running in the streets. Look at this. This is what the United States is responsible for. And we really, I mean, it is a very good thing. It is a very good thing that after years and decades of black people being murdered by the police, just gunned down, beaten up, targeted, vilified, criminalized, locked up, the truth about that is coming out. And just think about what impact even like one of these videos has. You know, whether it's Eric Harris in Tulsa or Eric Garner in New York City or Walter Scott in South Carolina, Freddie Gray. Look at the impact that has on people in terms of sickening and horrifying people. And I think that we have to do the same thing with U.S. mass murder around the world. You know, because these are our people too. We say that, you know, our youth in this country, doesn't matter what color, these are our youth. Well, you know what? Those are our people right there. Those are the masses of oppressed people, and the revolution that we've got to be all about is global. You know, I always we've had this palm card for a long time. American lives are not more important than other people's lives. Internationalism, the whole world comes first. And that sounds simple and basic and, everybody. No, you know what? If this was understood by people, it'd be a whole different world and a whole different country. Because one of the things that's so important in terms of bringing this reality to people is it shows the utter illegitimacy and bankruptcy of this system. Because this system is forever pointing at, whoever the Satan of the week is. Oh, Saddam Hussein, what a tyrant. Oh, ISIS, what a bunch of barbarians. Al-Qaeda, medieval fanatics. And most people are convinced that, whatever this country's quote unquote faults are, it's a force for good in the world, even if occasionally it makes mistakes inadvertently. Well, stop and think about this. This is deliberately starving a starving people. What is inadvertent about that? What is, slight miscal? No, you're bombing and destroying a country that you've destroyed and enslaved for the last 35 years in any case, and now making that suffering even worse. That's what this country does around the world, and it's totally illegitimate. And people are beginning to see that around the murder of black people, that it just goes on and on and on. Nobody gets charged with anything, and it's raising really deep questions about the system. And we have to do the same thing about the treatment of what this country does around the world. And you can go to any country on that map, and we can tell the same story at one time or another in one way or another. Close your eyes, put your finger up on some country up there, and you can tell a whole litany of horrors that were either created or made worse or collaborated with by the U.S. imperialists. And this is another another important point about Yemen. I think it'd help to put the lights down so we can talk about this for a minute. The U.S. is forever talking about Al-Qaeda, the big threat to the United States. Yes, these are lunatic, reactionary fundamentalists. Al-Qaeda has had a big presence in Yemen, especially to the east, up in there. And the U.S. has killed something like 1,400 people in drone strikes since 2004 in Yemen. Well, guess what's happening right now? The U.S. isn't paying much attention to Al-Qaeda in Yemen. I mean, they may do an occasional strike in Yemen now. The main focus of battle is over there, where a group called the Houthis, they're Zaidi Shia. Houthi is just a name that was given to them after the name of a leader of their uprising against the Saleh government, the tyranny, his tyranny. So the whole focus is on the Houthi now. Now, the Houthi have never been accused. They're a reactionary force. We can talk about that in the question and answer, but they've never been involved in quote-unquote international terrorism. So the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are in effect saying, well, okay, Al-Qaeda, they're not the main problem we've got. Now it's the Houthis, which, by the way, are the main fighting force in Yemen against Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula, right? And what does that, what does that tell you, along with the fact that in Syria, the U.S. is tacitly collaborating with jihadists, reactionary jihadists in Syria, including ISIS, and Saudi Arabia and citizens of Saudi Arabia are big funders of these international terrorists. And we're not even talking about the fact that the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Pakistan is also a gigantic supporter of it, a very close U.S. ally. And we're not even going to talk about the fact that Al-Qaeda was coalesced out of U.S. backing for jihadists in Afghanistan during the 1980s so they could be used against the Soviets. And a lot of people say, oh gosh, U.S. policy is inconsistent. You know, they're doing something over here and they're doing something different over there. No, U.S. policy isn't inconsistent. The point of this is it doesn't matter how barbaric, how lunatic, how bloodthirsty, and how savage some force is. If the U.S. imperialists can either make use of it or think it's not as big a problem as somebody else, then it's okay with them. You know, it's fascism and lunatic fundamentalism for them are a matter of taste and whether it fits into their strategic interests. You know, and you don't hear a lot these days in the U.S. media about how the U.S. is strengthening Al-Qaeda in Yemen, and so are the Saudis, because they really, the big issue with them is their reactionary state power and their imperialist control. So I think that's the other thing that's important about Yemen. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about some and give a little background to is, you know, I think especially revolutionaries, we have to understand the world in all of its complexity. And you can leave it off. I'll point at the map some. And I think, you know, we also have to understand how profound this period of time we're living through is, and how radically things are changing, and what real potential there is for an opening for revolution, and how different things are interconnected with each other. Because one of the things Revolution newspapers pointed out beginning this year is that there's no guarantee, but it is possible that a revolutionary crisis, a revolutionary situation could emerge, in particular in relation to this extremely sharp and foundational contradiction of the oppression of black people and other people of color, this whole system of mass incarceration. But one of the reasons that that's the case, I mean, that's kind of a concentration of a lot, but it's also interconnected with all the profound changes and upheaval that are going on around the world, including the Middle East. And I think Yemen is a very good case in point here. Yemen is a country that, it's like Egypt. You know, the U.S. didn't used to have to intervene directly in countries like Yemen or Egypt or Saudi Arabia and so on, because they had their loyal fascistic military dictators in power that were backed and supported in order to torture the population, to suppress them, to prevent any uprising. But the U.S. hold on this region was still being undermined and eroded. This is something I go into in the book, particularly in relation to Iran and Iraq. So the U.S. goes into Iraq in 2003, and the U.S. realized they had a problem. They don't come out, and some of the ruling class people don't come out on television and give the, John Q. public the lowdown on what they're worried about in terms of the region. But even George W. Bush made the point that, we've sought peace and stability for decades and we've ended up with neither. This is in 2001. He is saying this to justify this war on terror because and it's true. They sensed the winds of change beginning to blow. They realized, look, how long are you going to be able to keep an absolute monarchy? Here are the monarchies in this region. This is a monarchy. This is a monarchy. Morocco's a monarchy. Jordan's a monarchy. These different Gulf states are monarchies. What happened to the wave of democracy? I guess it didn't wash up here. In other words, these are the kinds of, and the ones that aren't monarchies are military dictatorships that the U.S. has supported. And so they realize, 1,700 members of the Saudi royal family are going to rule forever? No, they realize this has a lot of problems with it. So they went into Iraq in 2003 in order to radically transform Iraq and use it as a first step and as a platform for radically transforming the region, quote unquote, modernizing it on an imperialist basis, opening it up to global capital, making it more like South Korea or something, where you develop something of a middle class, you move past some of the old feudal relations, open the society up a bit. Again, all, under the leadership and overall domination of imperialism. And this did not work. They will not talk about this. They don't come out and talk about this, but this was an enormous strategic blunder and problem for them, because one of the things it did was, I'm not going to run through all of this, what it meant, but it's partly what has unleashed this cauldron of contradictions in this region. Again, which really erupted with the Arab Spring in 2011. First in Tunis. Here, look again. We'll go to the map here. Oops, it's all right. 2011, the government here was overthrown. The guy Saleh was forced out. Hundreds of thousands of people protesting. Egypt, 2011, Mubarak gone. Libya, uprising. U.S. comes in and supported it. What was that, 2012, I think? And murdered, Gaddafi ends up getting murdered. Right now, Libya's there is no state in Libya. There's a civil war. And of course, all of this has ended up strengthening reactionary fundamentalism. There's instability throughout northern Africa. Somalia has been, there's a civil war in Sudan that's been going on. There's upheaval and really a very weak, if any, kind of a state in Somalia. Iraq is on the verge of being partitioned into 3 different areas, and at the very least we can say the central government does not control the Kurdish area or the Sunni areas, and there's a horrific battle being fought now. Syria, today here's another horrific statistic. Everything I have described right now has contributed to the worst refugee, the internally displaced people, 58 million people now. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. You know, again, I go back to the news. If 10 Americans are hurt someplace, it's front page news. 58 million people, mostly from the Syrian civil war, which the U.S. has helped fuel. You know, that blood is on this government's hands. You know, and the fact that there's no accountability, no truth, but instead continuing to shed the blood of people all over the world in even more horrific ways, because that's what this system is based on. 58 million people. There are millions, there are 5 million from Iraq alone. There are probably 7 or 8 million in Syria. And other countries in northern Africa. Look at this refugee crisis of people drowning in the Mediterranean. All of this is from the oppressive relationships that the U.S. locked into place for decade after decade after decade, and then the shocks from its effort to come in and reorder the region, and then its manipulations and machinations and intervention in order to try to maintain that structure. And, you know, where's Bahrain? There have been big upheavals here. Lebanon, there's been decades of civil war. Gaza, people still living in an open-air prison and just towering Israeli war crimes against this, and we're not even talking about Pakistan and Afghanistan. So any place you look there, you know, there's been horrific crimes. But here's the thing. They backed Saleh for 33 years, but the whole thing they proved unable and unwilling to make any kind of positive change in Yemeni society, to alleviate this terrible hunger, to overcome the feudal relations that were there, and so on. But they called this a model of cooperation in the fight against terrorism, Yemen. Oops, 2011, goodbye. You know, they installed the vice president, Hadi, and then they called that a model for a transition to the post-Arab Spring world, because they kept the military. The military was still in place. And, you know, they installed one of their people, you know, as so-called meeting the will and the demands of the people, blah, blah, blah. It's bullshit. And I think they actually believed this, right? So it didn't stop the upheaval. The upheaval continued until, and really came to a head or burst out when the Houthis in September of last year, of 2014, took the capital at Sana'a. And the Houthis had been, leaders of the Zaydis had ruled the northern part of Yemen for many centuries as religious rulers. You know, and right now they're fighting under a religious fundamentalist banner. So there's nothing positive or progressive about them either. You know, and so they had been fighting sort of an on and off civil war against the central government for at least the last 10 years or so. And then this insurrection really picked up steam after 2012, including because elements of the military that were allied with the old ruler, Saleh, Ali Abdullah Saleh, joined with them. And so at this point, you know, when they declared a government in February, it was a month after that that the Saudis began bombing. But at this point, their momentum really has not been stopped. They, their Aden is a big, crucial city down here. And they're street fighting there now, and supposedly the Houthis are continuing to gain ground. And all of this is, I think some of the, and one thing is look, I'm not going to predict exactly how far this is going to go or whether they can contain all of this, but this is the reason that the Saudis are being so vicious about this is that they feel this could represent a threat to the stability of the kingdom. And they also feel that this could end up strengthening Iran, not because Iran is directly giving military aid necessarily to the Houthis, but it would, they have politically given political and a certain amount of aid to the Houthis, and it'd give people across the region a sense that this would be a gain for Iran and a weakening of Saudi influence in the region if the Houthis actually took over. And again, it's not like the Houthis are just Iranian pawns or they're anti-imperialists or any of that, but as you can see, this is a very strategic part of the world. This is the entry point to the Suez Canal, through which not quite 10% of the world's oil flows through that. A lot of trade goes through that. It's right at the Djibouti is where the U.S. imperialists have had military forces because of its geographic location. So, this has a lot of potential repercussions here, and I think that the point I think the point is twofold. Number one, these people, the rulers of this country, are tremendously powerful, but they are not all powerful. And a lot of things that they end up doing end up making the crises they face worse. And I think that's very important for people to grasp. Most people bounce between everything that happens as a result of what the imperialists want to have happen, and that's just really another form of feeling like they're all powerful and nothing can really be done. But what's going on here really illustrates the opposite. I mean, this is a radically different Middle East than it was 10 or 15 years ago. But I think the other thing that it points to is, look at how we're talking about this. Who's fighting it out here? And, in the 60s and early 70s, there used to be a socialist republic in Yemen, in the southern part of Yemen, a people's republic. I mean, I think it was more aligned with the Soviet Union. I don't think it wasn't a revolutionary Maoist kind of a government. That's not what it was. But it shows you that the people in Yemen and the people in the Middle East aren't somehow just inherently religious fundamentalists, and that this is part of their DNA or something like this. But now, here we are today, and you're fighting reactionary fundamentalist Sunnis versus military tyrants linked to the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, which is also a reactionary Sunni fundamentalist monarchy that, by the way, beheads people as their form of capital punishment. And they're fighting another religious sect, a derivative of the Shia, who also represent outmoded, oppressive class forces. So there's just a gigantic Reiko was mentioning the centrality of B.A. Babavakian's work here. There's just an enormous necessity for, and I just feel revolution books and the revolutionary forces have to be on a mission to get this new synthesis of communism all over the world. And, through the manifesto for a new stage of communism, which is in Arabic and Farsi, widely promoted. I mean, we have to oppose and expose the crimes of this government and show people around the world. I mean, look, there ought to be massive protests at the Saudi embassies and at the U.S., in front of the U.S. government over this right now, This is just outrageous. And just because they're fighting reactionaries does not justify anything the U.S. does. But at the same time as we're doing this, we really need, you saw the pictures of people. These are people that need revolution, that are crying out for revolution, whether they understand that or not. And, a key to this is getting the new synthesis out there worldwide, throughout the Middle East and every corner possible of the globe that we can do, to give people a way out of this madness, and to hurry up and make revolution in this country at the earliest possible time. Because just think what we could do with state power in this country. Not only would we be pulling the 7th Fleet or whatever fleet it is out of the Persian Gulf, all that shit would be done with, but we would be aiding the people, supporting revolution all over the world, supporting the needs and interests of the people all over the world. This would be a global earthquake that would change everything. So I want to stop with that. Saudi Arabia, in the overall sense, you might say, is a comprador client of the United States, right? But it's more complicated than that, because there's an article, for example, in the New York Times said, Saudi intransigence shows limits of U.S. power. Because the U.S. isn't totally happy about this bombing campaign. Yeah, there's hypocrisy, there's lying, but they're not that happy about a bunch of civilians being bombed, because look at what's that going to do to people's feelings about the U.S. in the Middle East and the world, right? But they can't, Saudi Arabia has its own necessities that is driving, and they have a certain amount of freedom. They can say to the U.S., what the fuck are you going to do? You're going to get rid of us? Really? Who's going to take our place? You're stuck with us. It's like we say about Israel, stood by and stuck with. So there are all these contradictions, and we can't just, they're a comprador, therefore the U.S. is telling them to do this. You can't just proceed by definitions. Got to look at the actual contradiction. Israel could attack Iran. That's not impossible. Obama would hate that. And I even read a report that Obama ordered the mobilization of U.S. planes to prevent that. I'm not sure that's true. I wouldn't doubt it, though. This is, Anyway.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you say that, because the way I was looking at it is that the U.S. was in the ocean there intercepting Iranian ships, basically because the U.S. felt it was a threat because the Houthis are Shia and would give more, would strengthen Iran. But actually, from what you're saying, it's way more complicated than that, because the Saudis themselves are uptight about it, and they have their own dynamic going on. So I didn't look at it that way, so I'm really glad that you brought that up. There's another point that I wanted to raise, because my first point is, do you have more, I did look at it like this, the U.S. has basically gotten the Saudis to do this, but they're saying, oh, look, they're doing it, we didn't do it. But actually, the Saudis have their own interests in that region, which seems to be somewhat principal at this point. That the U.S. unleashes these forces, but then they don't really have total control of where things will go. The other point that I wanted to raise that's related to this is that, unfortunately, in the world today, because of the horrific bloodletting and genocide that the U.S. is carrying out, these fundamentalists are a point of attraction to young people who otherwise, maybe 30 years ago, would have been attracted to revolutionary communism or Marxism, and you see this going on. I mean, there's that thing that just happened in Texas where those reactionaries had that awful art show, and then basically these guys come down there. And I've been thinking a lot about this because it is really crying out this question of the new synthesis being out there extremely broadly and sort of catapulted out into society in terms of this, that's no solution, but this actually is. And it's a real necessity. I mean, you were talking about the store. And I mean, I tried to help write this leaflet. I had a lot of problems with it, but you know, it's sort of like there's what you think you should say, and then there's like the contradictions and how do you dig into them. And that's been something that I think is important, so I'm glad that you raised that point, because they're two different approaches, two different methods and approaches. And one is really tries to simplify as opposed to dig into what the dynamics actually are.
I already have my own mic, but if you want to give me that one also, I'll take it.
Okay, sorry about that.
Well, let me just quickly, two things. I mean, we do need to embrace complexity. That's part of going for the truth as opposed to political truth. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, I don't believe in political truth. But if you're not actually, you know, digging into reality, I think, again, the Skybreak interview is a good teacher on this, because she gets into one of the things that struck me, she got into the complexity of what it takes to lead the movement for revolution. What do you emphasize? What don't you? What's key at this point? How do you mobilize the party? You know, all of the different elements of it, and I think it's part of this emphasis on being scientific. How can you be scientific if you're not looking at things as they actually are, and they actually are complicated? That doesn't mean we don't need to boil things down and get to the essence of things. But here's some examples. Here the U.S. is negotiating with Iran, you know, in part, and people should read, I wrote an article a few weeks ago on Iran, anyway, that's on the website. In part because the region is such a cauldron, and one of the things, so if it cuts a deal with Iran, it can avoid, hopefully, getting dragged into another war, which would really be a major thing. If they ended up in a war with Iran, it would make the whole situation in the region worse, and it would make it more difficult for the U.S. to meet these huge challenges from China and Russia that are happening right now. I just read an article about how China is investing $46 billion in Pakistan, Central Asia, and Russia to create a, quote, new Silk Road from China all the way to Europe. You know, so, and I mean, they're big, you know, major things going on. They just formed their version of the IMF, not at all on the same level. But in any case, this is happening. So they're trying to defuse the thing with Iran and also perhaps use Iran to kind of help stabilize. the region. But the fact that, but at the same time, the U.S. imperialists are going to make sure that they are, they are still fighting to maintain their dominance. So if Iran is making a move toward Yemen, in other words, if Iranian humanitarian relief had gotten through to Yemen, Iran's standing and status politically in Yemen would have been, hey, these are the people that helped us through the dark, So the U.S. and Saudis aren't going to let that happen. So even as these negotiations are going to go on, the U.S. is, threatening. They sent ships up to the Persian Gulf. That's, been resolved for the moment because it's not big enough deal to interfere with the negotiations. But so this U.S. effort to negotiate with Iran in order to maintain overall U.S. dominance has also unleashed Saudi Arabia and these other Gulf states to more fight for their own interests, because they see a situation where objectively, if sanctions are lifted, Iran's economic and political standing could really, really take a huge leap. And Iran's a country of 80 million people. Enormous oil and gas reserves, battle-hardened military, unlike Saudi Arabia, right? So the Saudis, this is one reason they've gone so hard at Yemen, and also because Yemen's right on their border. They're fighting, they fought skirmishes on the border. They formed a military with Egypt and the Gulf states, 40,000 people intervention force. Now we'll see if it amounts to anything. But, in other words, so it's unleashed this situation where the Saudis and the Israelis are pursuing their own interests in the way that they think is essential to protect the stability of their rule. And could that end up torpedoing the Iran deal? I don't know. I mean, maybe not the most likely thing, but impossible? I don't think so. Anyway, so.
It's like really giving me a headache thinking about like the U.S. trying to hold these contradictions together. Like these three, like Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, these three, like those are sort of like the stable countries in that region right now. Well, I guess you could say Turkey too, but anyway, we're not. But these three countries, and like Saudi Arabia and Israel, like one is the home of the fucking Zionist monster, and then the other one is like Sunni fundamentalists, and the other is like Shia reaction. It's like, how can the U.S. work with these three stable countries, but and keep it all together, like, and with each of them pursuing their own interests increasingly, right? But luckily, we don't have to try to hold it together for them. But the thing I was thinking about is, shit, I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, like just on what you were bringing up, or both of you guys were talking about in this, like, and BA's talked about, right? And these, like, the more imperialism creates, uproots people from their lives and creates this chaotic situation, the more basis there is for people to be attracted to fundamentalism as this, like, source of stability and answers to, simple answers to a complex world and stuff and all this kind of shit. But I just think, I feel like we should also just keep in mind that, it also creates a basis for people to be, drawn to revolution and communism. That's one thing. And also fundamentalism itself creates that basis too, because it's awful. Like, it's like the more, I mean, like, I have this Facebook friend. Actually, some of you guys probably may have read about him because he was this guy Mokhtar was like he was this American from San Francisco, Yemeni American that was like finally able to get out, and he was in the Chronicle and everything because the U.S. This is another part of the horror of what the U.S. is doing there. They were not even evacuating their own citizens, even though every other country, every other European and Asian and African country that had citizens in Yemen had evacuated. The U.S. refused to do it. This guy finally got out by taking a fucking raft to Somalia or something or whatever, but he's like posting stuff on Facebook about basically how people just basically, the average Yemeni people just feel trapped between these forces, the Saudis and the bombing and the Houthis and all this shit, right? So I just feel like even though people are being, in this chaotic situation, people can be drawn to fundamentalism, they can also, fundamentalism sucks, you know, people can, and reactionaries are reactionary, and people are not gonna put up with it. Like, people should, I don't know if anyone saw the movie Timbuktu about North Africa, but that also shows what it's like to live under reactionary fundamentalism, and it's not good for people, and people will rebel against it too. But then, yeah, we have to get an alternative out there too, so.
Well, just go ahead, pass the mic. I just wanted to comment. Number one, post this article and another important thing to post is BA's statement on Egypt. Millions have stood up, and the future remains unwritten. That's very relevant. What happened in Egypt is very similar to what happened in Yemen after 2011. This stuff, let's get it on Facebook, you know. We didn't have that much time to build for this, whatever. But when these articles come out and we see these, you know, communities of people on Facebook or whatever, let's get these articles out there. But the other thing that you're bringing out, I mean, one thing I do have to say, stability is relative. Remember Iran, it was 2009, there was a huge upheaval in Iran, and all of these countries are beset with different contradictions. There's just been a riot by Ethiopian Jews against, right within Israel, you know. So all of these, there's contradiction within everything. I mean, you're right. One of the reasons the relative stability of Israel and even Iran is something the U.S. is trying to take advantage of and utilize. But I thought your other point is right as well. I mean, in Yemen in 2011, tens of thousands of people marched against the Saleh regime that were a broad spectrum, and they were not pro Al-Qaeda or pro Houthi, or, you know, they just wanted, it was similar to the thrust of the uprising in Egypt. People wanted freedom. And so you're right, there's a huge basis for this, you know, in these kind of situations. So.
A couple other articles that I thought were good too, which people may not have read because I'm not sure they were in the print edition, are the articles from the World Social Forum, is that what it's called? That people supporting the new synthesis and also the party in Iran were distributing. So I thought those were really good around this too. My question is, you know, in terms, you haven't really mentioned ISIS or ISIL, and I was wondering how that's sort of the way the ruling class has been putting it. And I'm wondering whether that's that Iran, you know, the U.S. is having to rely on Iran to back the government in Iraq to fight ISIL, and then in Yemen, and that's Iraq having a Shia government right on the northern border of Saudi Arabia, is the they don't want to see Shia Islam spread to Yemen. So I'm just wondering, is ISIL a real threat to U.S. interests there? And also, is Iran, providing military support to the Houthi?
Well, just on the last thing, I have not seen evidence that that is the case about the military support. I haven't heard that. And if, as one of these commentators pointed out, Yemen is awash in weapons. So, whatever, if Iran sent a boatload over, it's not going to really change much of anything. So, and probably the U.S. has supplied far more weapons into Yemen. The other, so I think that it's more a question of Iranian political support, and but the other thing is, look, all of these forces are problems for the U.S. It is not the case that Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula isn't a contradiction for the U.S. It's not the case. ISIS is a big contradiction for the U.S. because it has, for right now, it controls a big chunk of territory in Iraq and Syria. It is inspiring people, around the world, to take up this banner. I mean, there have been people in Libya, I think even in Yemen, there's been attacks where people are claiming they're part of it, and it does just show the enormous depth of anger and hatred of the U.S. and also the momentum that this trend has, this horrible reactionary pole has. And in Iraq, the huge problem is that ISIS is directly undermining the coherence of the Iraqi state as a whole, and also going up against the regime that the U.S. installed. So this is a huge problem, and to the degree there's instability and civil wars going on, this always has the potential to have a ripple effect into places like Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and some of the other neighboring states. And look, if Saudi Arabia fell, I mean, this would be just an enormous shock to the entire global economy and the whole structure of U.S. imperialist dominance. I mean, I would assume that they would be compelled to mount an invasion and try to take direct control. I'm not sure about that, but this would be a huge thing because people understand Saudi Arabia has more oil reserves than any other country in the world. I think the U.S. has surpassed it in terms of oil production, but Saudi Arabia is the leading swing producer in the world. They can ramp up and down oil production, which has been a very important means of exerting influence on the global economy. So this, I'm sure they have done scenarios about what exactly that they would do in that eventuality, and probably find some of that. But yeah, these different reactionary forces are a huge problem. Here's one thing that this was something from the New York Times that I thought was sort of interesting. Part of it is you have, the U.S. is fighting these jihadist forces, right? These reactionary fundamentalists. Then there are also these regional rivalries that are going on. Then there are also global rivalries involved in this because, you know, the leading investor in Iraqi oil sector is China. And one of the leading investors in Iranian energy sector. But, you know, they're talking about how, and the result of this is what they're calling a patchwork of different policies where they're trying to do this here and do that there. And so they're interviewing one of these imperialists, whether the puzzle reflects the lack of a coherent policy on the administration side or whether the puzzle simply reflects the complexity of the power struggles on the ground in the region, well, both are probably true. The chaos gives regional rivals more reasons to fight out that power struggle and more arenas to do it in. And then it talks about the lightning pace of events, given rise to the sense that Obama has no long-term strategy for the region. You know, in picking proxies and allies of convenience, the administration risks making the chaos worse. You know, so these are the, what is the word? The Hobson's choice of, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a situation. But one thing I do want to say in terms of one of the things that Yemen shows is that, look, the imperialists, the Israelis, they are willing to bomb countries into smithereens and just let millions and millions of people just rot and die and live in chaos in order to preserve the overall structure of their power. I mean, look at a country like Somalia or Sudan. There have been decades of, you know, different internal conflicts and barely functioning state and tremendous starvation. All this has been going on. So again, to bring anything good out of this, you have to have a force that has a program for something positive, to wrench something positive out of this. I mean, look at what Israel's done to Gaza. They're willing, you know, to commit slow genocide there decade after decade after decade. You know, and the U.S. is willing perfectly, they realize their risks and all this, but these are monsters we're dealing with. You know, this is a strategy that they've tried to do in Iraq for decades. In the 80s and the 90s was to cripple Iraq and prevent it from arising as any kind of a regional power. So bombing it, sanctioning it, invading it, then that didn't work, so they finally invaded it and then just broke the whole thing open. You know, but this is, you know, this is, yeah.
I think going back to this, you made some statement about police murder, murder by police being a possible factor for emergence of a revolutionary situation in this country, and then you said something like, and it's related, or that has a relation to what's going on in the Middle East and stuff. So I was thinking about that, and thinking about that it has, I mean, it's made a tremendous difference around the world. I think the stuff in Israel against police brutality there, that has some relationship to people rising up in Baltimore and across the US. And it's kind of like, you know, now when you Google, I do like the chairman says, you know, Google police shoot an unarmed man, and you find there's a lot of, it's all over the world, these relations, right? And, hello. And so that was one thought. And I think that in terms of how to get these things out there, this is imperialism, so a lot of these people are dislocated and, you know, spread out. So there's a lot of people here in the U.S., including in the San Francisco metropolitan area, right, that that should be introduced to the new synthesis with the idea that it can be spread in their home countries. I mean, that when we were 2 days before April 14th, I was in the mission, and these people with hijabs, this family came up to me, and the kids were very enthralled by the poster of all the faces of people who'd been killed by police, and all of a sudden their mother started talking in this very emotional way, and she said, you know, that's what's going on in our country. She goes, we're just being killed. And I said, where's your country? And it was Yemen. And she goes, where are the people standing up for us? You know, and I said, well, that's us. These are our, you know, the same thing you said. These are our youth. The people in Yemen are our people. So I don't know. Those are just thoughts. And I had one more. And anyway, I mean, because these things are hard to explain to people in sound bites, because the media has already said what's happening in sound bites, right? And it's totally wrong, right? So I think that some of this stuff is, you know, actually being able to spread and fight for things on a fairly deep level is kind of the simple is, you know, there should be more resistance and exposure and standing with the people who are being displaced, you know, but the more, the bigger thing is to get that there is a way out. Oh, that was my other thought, was when I was, 15, right, there were all these posters of, you know, it all from China, but they had like, you know, China and guys from Africa and guys from the Middle East, and everybody was like, you know, going like that. You know, but that's the difference in, you know, and I think we talk about that a little. I think Raymond talks about that a little, but that's part of the difference having a socialist country in the world makes, is that it, you know, it provides a pole and a beacon in a practical and ideological sense for the peoples of the world, that there is truly something different to fight for. You know.
Well, yeah. Just on the last two comments, I mean, you know, I do think we all need to be wrestling with this question of how do we get this break out of the ignorance and suppression and, you know, never having heard about the new synthesis, or people refusing to engage it or not engaging it seriously and so on. I think we all have to really wrestle with this, and I think one of the things about the moving the store that you were talking about at the beginning and so enthusiastically and is so important is, you know, how do we put this bookstore on a whole other footing around that kind of a thing? And I think that, you know, some of the things that I think that we need to do are, I mean, look, you mentioned that there are a lot of people from the Middle East living in the Bay Area. Well, you know, we need to make this store a beacon for this whole Bay Area, where people are drawn here and know about the fact that this is where you come to understand the world and change the world and find a way out and find a real solution to all this. You know, this is where you come. And I think that, I mean, there's a, you know, look at the International House is right up the street here, you know. There's a giant university right here. And I think that one of the battles we have to wage is battle with these intellectuals about their moral and political responsibility to engage the new synthesis. And if they're not doing that, they're not fully carrying their responsibility to humanity of trying to prevent the slaughter of millions of people every year and the literal destruction of the environment of planet Earth. You know, that's everybody's responsibility, and they have a disproportionate responsibility. And again, I point people to the Ardea Skybreak interview because she goes through all the arguments that people bring up not to engage. And she says very frankly that they're not near anywhere close to the number of people engaging this new synthesis that need to engage it. But you know, the basis to change that lies in reality, as people have been talking about, in the horrendous contradictions people face. But we ourselves have to be on a mission to fight it through, like she kind of outlines in that interview, to bust this through. You know, because it isn't okay to say, well, I'm voting for Hillary, obliterate Iran, Clinton, and that's good enough. No, That's being complicit with all the stuff that we were showing and talking about here. That's what that is, you know, and it's not acceptable. So I think that's one very important thing. Look, the other thing is, what was the name of Bob Avakian's dialogue with Cornel West? Revolution and Religion. This is, as we've been talking about, that is a topic that affects billions of people. This is a great, great resource, and I think this is another very important thing to be very widely promoting. And look, one of the things that dialogue did was open up a strategic pathway for, you know, progressive or, you know, religious people who want human emancipation to be part of this revolution. You know, obviously we're not talking about groups like ISIS or, you know, these reactionary, or these reactionary Christian fascist groups, which are, you know, being supported by the ruling class in this country. You know, they don't have any problem with that. But I think those are some of the things that we should do. I think promoting right now, I think, what was it, people, I'm trying to remember, they published, was it 130 countries, people from 130, am I exaggerating this? At one point, Revolution newspaper put out how 130 countries had looked at the website. So promoting the website is another very important thing. But this is the kind of thing we should be trying to figure out, you know, how to break this thing through, as well as promoting a culture of resistance, so it is not okay for people just to be walking around doing nothing while the U.S. is preventing people in Yemen from getting food. I mean, look, just today, you know, it was reported that the International Committee of the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders had condemned Saudi Arabia for making it impossible for them to deliver food aid and medical aid. You know, and who's giving Saudi Arabia the jets that they're using to bomb Yemen? By the way, Saudi Arabia doesn't, to my knowledge, doesn't make advanced fighter planes. Or I'm not sure they manufacture any advanced aircraft, jet aircraft. You know, it could be wrong, but I don't think so. You know, they buy billions of dollars worth of arms from the U.S. That's what's falling on the people of Yemen right now. So anyway, you had something, yeah.
Yeah, I wondered, I wondered how this refugee crisis was going to play out, because the two largest countries that have the two greatest numbers of refugees are coming from Syria and Yemen, right? And they're making their way to Libya. And I was just looking at the map how
The
far they have to
largest
go.
numbers are from Yemen?
And okay, I misread it then. Anyway, I guess my point though was that the refugee. I was wondering how the refugee crisis is playing out with the Yemeni population, because I know that. I mean, this is just in the last few years, but like there's a Yemeni grocer in Oakland who was killed in Yemen because he couldn't get out, and that was very recent. And there's a number of Yemeni grocers and stuff in the Bay Area, and I was wondering, and I know they're trying to get their families out and stuff, and I just wondered how they're, what their take is on all this and everything like that, with the United States, promoting the bombing and everything, not to mention all the drone strikes in the years before. And so I just wondered how that was coming out. I mean, I'm just looking at how far the people have to actually travel, to get to Libya, which is a launching point to get to Italy and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just horrific. The actual numbers, I think I misspoke. It's 38 million people, the total people internally displaced, so they're still within the same country. Syria is the most, 7.6 million internally, and another 4 million refugees outside the country. And I know in Iraq, it's about 2 or 3 million external and at least 2 million internally displaced.
With the number of the refugees or the people that are trying to get out of Yemen, they're actually not being supported in their efforts to get out by the United States. The U.S. Embassy is going, forget it,
Well, but there, I think our task is really to, make basic points to people. People need to confront the horror of this. Confront, that's step one, is confront the reality of it is not fun to do that. Tough shit. This is what's going on to other human beings on this planet, and as this thing says, American lives are not more important than other people's lives. So that's point one, is confront what's going on. Point two is do the work to understand why these things are happening. And I think we have to struggle with people, not scream at them, not whatever. But look, this was one of the important things. We wrote about this in the blockade of Sather Gate at Cal. Normally, those students just stream through there, and most of you have tried to leaflet up there. You know what it's like. And this thing at Sather Gate that we did on April 14th, the students there did, the Revolution Club and Stop Mass Incarceration Network kind of organized it, but then a bunch of students took up and just blocked people from walking through Sather Gate and just going on their merry way. I mean, blocked it. They couldn't do it. There were physical confrontations, so they couldn't do it. I mean, nobody was trying to beat anybody up or get in a fight, but today they're not walking through there. They can go around. They can take another 5 or 10 minutes, whatever, to go around. And that was a real ideological confrontation to confront the fact that people are being murdered and black and brown lives matter. And people had to stop and think about that. And it had that effect on people. And a lot of people didn't like it. Too bad. Too bad. I mean, it would have been wrong to aggressively try to, nobody's physically attacking anybody. That wasn't the point. It was a nonviolent protest. But You know, it was a confrontation. And people just, you know, and it's all, and you know, if you would have stopped any of those people, 90% of them would have said, oh, I oppose police murder. And they probably do. But so what if you're not doing anything about it? That's not good enough. You know, the Earth's environment's going to be destroyed as people are going merrily along their way saying, oh, I care about the environment. I went to Earth Day 2 years ago. Not good enough. You know, people have to confront what's happening and that they have a responsibility to act and that there's a way out that they should look into. And then if they have serious issues or questions, fine. Let's get into it.